Hey, welcome to our channel. Make sure to subscribe and turn on the bell so you never miss our latest content.
I woke up on that Thursday thinking it would be another ordinary day. You don't realize how precious ordinary is until it's gone. For 17 years, my marriage to Cassandra had been built on the bedrock of routine, a comfortable rhythm that governed our lives. My days were spent under the wide-open sky at Crestfall Farm, my hands stained with the good earth, my mind occupied by the needs of the land and the livestock. In the late afternoon, I'd come home to the scent of dinner and the sound of my family gathered. Cassandra was a teacher at the local elementary school, which meant she always beat me home. Our sons, Declan, 16, and Silas, 14, were the twin pillars of my world. Declan, in his last year of high school, was a whirlwind of ambition, his sights set on veterinary school with a fierce determination that made me proud. Silas was the quiet one, an old soul with a gentle nature who found his voice in the kitchen, a passion he'd inherited from his grandmother. That morning, the routine fractured, just slightly. As I was pulling on my work boots, Cassandra stopped me, a strange excitement in her eyes. "Elijah," she said, her voice brighter than usual, "could you do something for me? I want to make that special lasagna for dinner tonight, the one with the white sauce." I smiled. "Sounds good to me." "Oh, I'll need fresh Parmesan, the good kind, and a big bunch of basil. You'll have to go to Rossi's Italian market downtown. Nothing from the supermarket will do." The request was odd. We did our big grocery run together on Saturdays, a ritual as fixed as the sunrise. But seeing her so animated about a meal, a spark I hadn't seen in a while, made me happy. "Sure thing," I said, kissing her cheek. "I'll leave the farm a little early." Yellow. The day passed in a familiar blur of mending fences and checking on the herd, but the thought of that special dinner lingered. It felt like a promise of something more than just food, a return to an earlier time in our marriage. Around 3 in the afternoon, earlier than usual, I washed up, traded my boots for driving shoes, and headed into town in my pickup truck. I parked across the street from Rossi's, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows down Main Street. As I was about to get out, a flash of color caught my eye. A woman in a vibrant red dress was walking toward the entrance of the Pine Valley Motel, a place known for peeling paint and hourly rates. She was holding hands with a man. The dress was a punch to the gut. It was a simple, elegant sheath, the color of a perfect summer rose. I had bought that very dress for Cassandra for our last wedding anniversary, just 2 months ago. I remembered how her eyes lit up when she opened the box. The man beside her was also familiar, Preston Holloway, a slick, self-important man who sat on the school board, married to a sweet woman named Margaret, with 2 young daughters. My blood ran cold. I watched, frozen, as the woman turned her head slightly to laugh at something he said. The profile was unmistakable. It was Cassandra, my wife, the mother of my children, was walking into a cheap motel with another man. I expected a surge of rage, a white-hot explosion that would have me storming across the street, but it never came. Instead, a strange, chilling calm washed over me, hollowing out my insides until I felt like a spectator to my own life. My hand, which had been on the door handle, fell limp into my lap. I leaned my head back against the seat, the worn leather cool against my skin. I would wait. I would sit there until she came out, and I would watch the ordinary day I had woken up to burn down to ash. For an hour, which felt like a lifetime, I sat in that truck and watched the motel. I thought about Declan and Silas, probably at home by now, starting their homework, completely unaware that their world was tilting on its axis. I thought about the lies Cassandra must have told, the intricate web she must have woven to be here, in this place, at this moment. I thought about all the special dinners we'd shared, the promises we'd made under starry country skies, the future we had planned together, now a landscape of ruin. The calm remained, a terrifying, empty peace. I was no longer a participant in my life. I was just a witness to its end. It was nearly 6 o'clock when the door to that motel room finally opened again. The light was fading, painting the sky in shades of bruised purple and orange. Preston Holloway came out first. He glanced around nervously, his movements quick and furtive, before hurrying to his car and speeding away without a backward glance. He didn't look like a man in love. He looked like a thief making a getaway. Cassandra waited a few minutes before she emerged. She stood on the walkway for a moment, fixing her hair, smoothing down the front of the red dress. She looked composed, as if she were leaving a parent-teacher conference. She started walking toward her own car, parked a few spots down from the room. That's when I moved. I opened the door of my truck and stepped out, the sound of it closing echoing in the quiet parking lot. I started walking toward her. She saw me when I was about 20 feet away. Her entire body went rigid. The color drained from her face, leaving it a waxy, pale mask. Her hand, holding her car keys, clenched into a tight fist. "Elijah," she stammered, her voice a strangled whisper. "What are you doing here?" I stopped a few feet from her, close enough to see the panic in her eyes. I just looked at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch. That red dress, the one I had chosen with such care, now felt like a shroud. It represented the most profound betrayal I could ever imagine. "I came to buy ingredients for your special lasagna," I said, my voice level, almost conversational. The calm was still there, a shield of ice around my heart. "What a coincidence to run into you here." She tried to form words, an explanation, a lie, but they came out as a jumble of incoherent sounds. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. I raised my hand, a simple gesture to stop her. "Don't," I said. I let a small, cold smile touch my lips. It didn't reach my eyes. "That red dress still looks beautiful on you today." The smile froze her more than any shout ever could. In that instant, she knew. She knew that I knew everything. The pretense shattered, and all that was left was the ugly truth standing between us in the fading light of the motel parking lot. I turned without another word, walked back to my truck, and drove home. I left her there, trembling, a solitary figure in a beautiful red dress. When I got to the house, Declan and Silas were watching television in the living room, the picture of teenage normalcy. "Hey, Dad, where's Mom?" Declan asked, not looking away from the screen. "She'll be home soon," I replied, my voice sounding hollow in my own ears. Dinner that night wasn't lasagna. It was a couple of frozen pizzas I found in the back of the freezer. As I watched the boys eat, talking about their weekend plans, I felt like I was watching a movie of a life that was no longer mine. After they had cleared the table and gone upstairs, I went into the bedroom I had shared with Cassandra for 17 years and pulled a large suitcase from the top of the closet. Methodically, I began to pack clothes, toiletries, my important documents. I took the framed photos of the boys from my nightstand. I took a few books. I left everything else. Each item I placed in the suitcase was a deliberate act of separation, a severing of a tie. Cassandra came home around 10. I had just finished zipping the suitcase. She stood in the doorway, her face tear-streaked and blotchy. The red dress was rumpled. "Elijah, we need to talk," she pleaded. "I think we've said all we need to for one day," I replied, my voice flat. I picked up the suitcase. "I'm moving into the old foreman's house on the farm for now. Tomorrow, I'll start looking for a place to rent in town." She started to cry, a storm of desperate sobs, and reached for my arm. I gently stepped away, avoiding her touch. "And the boys?" she choked out. "What about our family?" "The boys can visit me whenever they want," I said, my voice hardening slightly. "As for our family, I think you decided to end it this afternoon." I carried my suitcase down the stairs. Before I left, I stopped at the living room door. The boys were still engrossed in their show. "Boys," I said, "I'm going to be staying out at the farm for a few days. You know where to find me if you need anything." They nodded, confused but not yet alarmed. On the dark country road to the farm, I pulled over at an old, rusty payphone, one of the last ones left in the county. I dropped a few coins in and dialed the number for the Holloways. "Margaret, this is Elijah Vance," I said when she answered. "I'm sorry to call so late, but I need to tell you something important about your husband." The conversation lasted only 3 minutes. I told her exactly what I had seen. I didn't embellish. I didn't editorialize. I just stated the facts. Then I hung up before she could ask any questions. It wasn't an act of revenge. It was an act of closure, an act of burning the whole rotten structure to the ground. The months that followed were a blur of lawyers and paperwork. I filed for divorce immediately. Cassandra, devastated and broken, didn't contest it. The separation was finalized before I had even begun to fully process the future. I knew I needed to close that door cleanly, with as much dignity as I could muster, so I could move forward without the poison of resentment. While I focused on work and finding a small house to rent in town, the life I had left behind began to crumble. I only heard about it in fragments. From town gossip I tried to ignore, and from the quiet, worried looks on my sons' faces when they'd come to visit me for the weekend. Cassandra, who had always been such a dedicated teacher, started missing work. Her nights, I gathered, dissolved into a series of empty bottles and a parade of strange men. The cozy home I had built, the home that always smelled of baking or fresh laundry, now, according to Declan, smelled of stale cigarettes and cheap whiskey. The older he got, the more Declan tried to shield Silas from the chaos, but he was lost himself. He told me about nights when Cassandra would come home drunk, screaming at them for no reason, only to collapse into tears moments later, begging for forgiveness. The breaking point came one Saturday morning. Cassandra had brought a man named Gage home. From what Declan told me later, the man was loud, crude, and treated the house like his own personal territory. During breakfast, Gage lit a cigarette at the kitchen table. When Silas, always polite, asked him if he could please put it out, Gage exploded. He shoved my 14-year-old son against the wall. Who do you think you are, kid? He snarled. Declan, who had shot up in height over the last year, immediately put himself between Gage and his brother. Get out of our house, Declan said, his voice shaking but firm. Gage just laughed and slapped him hard across the face, leaving a bright red mark. Cassandra ran in from the living room. She saw the scene, Gage with his hand raised, Declan with the mark on his cheek, Silas crying in the corner. She should have defended her son. She should have thrown that man out of her house and out of their lives. Instead, she just begged Gage to calm down. Please, Derek, they're just kids, she whimpered. That afternoon, after Gage finally left, Declan made a decision. He took Silas by the hand. We're leaving, he said. We're going to Dad's. They packed what they could into their school backpacks, a few changes of clothes, their toothbrushes, some personal items. Declan left a short note on the kitchen table. We went to Dad's house. Take care. It was a Sunday afternoon when they walked the 8 blocks to the small house I was renting. I was reading on the porch when I saw them coming down the street, 2 small, determined figures with backpacks slung over their shoulders. As they got closer, I saw that Silas was crying, his small body shaking with silent sobs. I was on my feet before they reached the gate. When I opened it, Silas looked up at me, his face a mess of tears and fear. Dad, he said, his voice cracking. Can we live with you? I didn't need to ask what happened. I saw it all in their eyes. I knelt and pulled both of my sons into a fierce hug, holding them tight against my chest. You're home, was all I could say. That night, for the first time in months, my boys slept peacefully, knowing they were safe. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I had made the right choice. I had always known Willow Hayes, but I had never really seen her. She had worked at Crestfall Farm for 3 years, a quiet, competent woman with a special way with both animals and people. She was 35, divorced, and lived alone. There was a peacefulness about her, a self-contained strength that I had admired from a distance. When Declan and Silas started living with me full-time, they naturally began spending their afternoons at the farm after school. It was Willow who welcomed them, not with a fuss, but with a simple, accepting warmth. She seemed to understand what they needed without them ever having to say a word. She had studied veterinary science but had to drop out due to financial problems. Still, her knowledge was vast. Declan, with his dreams of becoming a vet, was captivated. Willow would show him how to identify signs of illness in the cattle, or explain the complex social behaviors of the horses. She treated his questions with seriousness and respect. For Silas, who was still withdrawn and fragile, Willow's presence was a gentle balm. She taught him how to milk the cows, showed him which herbs to pick from her garden to soothe a fussy calf, and discovered his hidden passion for cooking. Soon, Silas was bringing her recipes he'd found, and they'd talk for hours about flavors and techniques. I watched these interactions from afar with a growing sense of wonder and admiration. Willow treated my sons as if they were her own, but she never tried to replace their mother. She was simply a steady, kind presence in their lives, a safe harbor in their storm. One afternoon, I came to the barn to find Silas crying, huddled in a stall of fresh hay. Willow was sitting quietly beside him. Some kids at school, he sobbed. They were making jokes about Mom. My heart ached for him. I started to step forward, but Willow caught my eye and gave a slight shake of her head. I stayed back, listening. You know, Silas, she said softly, her voice like calm water. Sometimes people make bad choices, and when they do, it says something about them, and the pain they're in. It never, ever says anything about you. But why did she do that to us? He whispered. Willow thought for a moment before answering. I think your mom is going through a very difficult time. Sometimes, when people are hurting that much, they react in ways that hurt the ones they love the most. It's about her pain, Silas. It's not a reflection of you. Silas leaned his head against her shoulder, and she wrapped an arm around him. He felt comforted. For the first time since the separation, someone had given him a way to understand the situation without anger or blame. Watching them from the shadows of the barn, a feeling I had long thought dead stirred within me. It was the forgotten rhythm of a racing heart, the warmth of something new and hopeful taking root in scorched earth. I wasn't just seeing a kind employee anymore. I was seeing the woman who was quietly helping to heal my family. In the months that followed, Willow and I began spending more time together. It started with conversations about farm work, then evolved into casual dinners at my little house after the boys were settled with their homework. She was an amazing cook, creating simple, delicious meals that filled the home with warmth. One rainy October night, the 4 of us were crammed onto my small sofa watching a movie. Silas fell asleep, his head in Willow's lap. She gently covered him with a blanket, stroking his hair with an unconscious, maternal tenderness. Declan, sitting next to me, whispered so quietly I almost didn't hear him. She's like a real mom. I looked at Willow, who smiled as she adjusted the blanket around Silas. In that moment, Watching the three of them, I knew I had found something far greater than just a second chance at romance. I had found the missing pieces of a complete family. 2 weeks after that night on the sofa, I invited Willow out to dinner, just the two of us. It was our first official date. We talked for hours, not just about the farm or the boys, but about our own dreams, our fears, our pasts. She confessed she had always wanted children, but her first marriage had ended before that could happen. I spoke about how hard it was to trust again after Cassandra's betrayal. I understand your fear, she said, her hand resting gently on mine across the table. But sometimes, we have to accept that some people enter our lives to teach us what true love looks like, even if they arrive after a great deal of pain. On the eve of Christmas that year, I knew what I had to do. I'd bought a simple but beautiful ring with a small, clear stone that reminded me of her eyes. After dinner, as the boys were excitedly talking about the morning to come, I stood up and cleared my throat, my heart hammering against my ribs. Willow, I began, holding the small velvet box. All three of them looked at me. You brought the light back into our lives. You healed things in us we didn't even know were broken. I opened the box. Will you marry us? Before Willow could even answer, Declan and Silas started clapping and cheering. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were tears of pure happiness. She extended her hand to me. Yes, she said, her voice thick with emotion. I accept. I will marry all three of you. 3 years passed in a whirlwind of happiness and hard work. Our new family settled into a rhythm that was even more comfortable and genuine than the one I had known before. Then, a letter arrived that changed everything. My uncle, Alistair Vance, the owner of Crestfall Farm, had passed away at the age of 78. Alistair was more of a father to me than an uncle. He was a beloved figure in the county, known for his generosity and deep love for the land. The funeral was simple, just as he would have wanted. Afterward, his lawyer asked Willow and me to stay behind. Alistair left a will, the lawyer said, handing me a sealed envelope, and he wanted you to read this together, privately. With trembling hands, I opened it. The letter was written in my uncle's familiar, strong handwriting. My dear Elijah, if you're reading this, it means I've finally gone off to find my beloved wife in the great beyond. Over all these years we've worked together, I've watched you grow from a green young man into an honest and responsible one. I also saw how you rebuilt your life after it was torn apart, and how Willow became the perfect partner for you and a wonderful mother for Declan and Silas. Therefore, I am leaving Crestfall Farm to you, in its entirety. But there's something I never told anyone. This land holds a secret. Back in the 1972, geologists discovered significant copper deposits on the property. I kept this information secret because I wanted the farm to remain a peaceful place. Now, I leave the decision to you. The mineral rights documents are in the bank vault. You can choose to explore this resource, or you can keep the farm as it has always been. I trust your wisdom to make the right choice. With all my love and gratitude, Alistair. Willow and I sat in stunned silence. The revelation was completely unexpected. The farm we loved, the peaceful sanctuary we called home, was sitting on a potential fortune. What do you think we should do? Willow asked, her eyes searching mine. I looked out the window, toward the rolling green hills of Crestfall. I think, I said slowly, we can find a way to honor both of my uncle's legacies. The decision we made was a reflection of everything our new family stood for. We wouldn't allow industrial mining to scar the land that Alistair had so lovingly preserved. Instead, after months of research and consultation with environmental specialists, we developed a sustainable plan. We leased out small, carefully selected sections of the property for controlled copper extraction, using modern, low-impact methods. The companies we partnered with were environmentally certified, and the contracts included strict limits on their footprint. The financial resources that began to flow in were substantial, but we didn't use them for personal luxury. We poured them back into the land, transforming Crestfall Farm into something new, something that honored both its rustic past and its prosperous future. We built a series of elegant, secluded cabins, each with a stunning view of the valley. We turned the old farmhouse into a gourmet restaurant and hired a top chef. We created hiking trails, stocked an artificial lake for sport fishing, and established an equestrian center for guided horseback tours. We renamed it Crestfall Ranch. Our family became the heart of the operation. Declan, now 19 and enrolled in veterinary school, spent his breaks managing the equestrian center, his childhood dream realized. He cared for the guest horses with a skill and passion that was incredible to watch. Silas, at 17, discovered that his love for cooking was a true calling. He apprenticed with our chef, and soon created a special menu for the ranch's restaurant, featuring farm-to-table dishes made with ingredients grown right on our property. His creations became a local legend. Crestfall Ranch became famous, We attracted tourists from all over the country, including a few celebrities seeking a quiet, luxurious escape. Rural tourism magazines wrote feature stories about us, highlighting the perfect harmony we had created between nature and luxury. Photos of me, Willow, Declan, and Silas smiling, proud, and together graced the glossy pages. The family that had started in pieces was now a shining example of renewal. We hadn't just rebuilt a life, we had cultivated a legacy. Meanwhile, on the other side of town, Cassandra worked in a small candy factory called Sweetland. I heard she was living quietly. During her lunch breaks, I imagined she might flip through those same magazines and see the faces of the sons she had lost, smiling back at her from a life she was no longer a part of. We had harvested something beautiful from the seeds of a bitter pain. 5 years after I had walked out of that house, my phone rang. It was a Tuesday in March, and I was in my office reviewing reservations for the busy spring season. Elia? The voice on the other end was thin and trembling, but I recognized it instantly. It was a voice I had completely blocked from my thoughts. Life with Willow and the boys was so full, so happy, that the past rarely intruded. I had managed to forgive, not for her sake, but for my own, but I had never felt the need for reconciliation. I was silent for a few seconds. Cassandra, I finally said, my own voice neutral. How did you get this number? I got it from Declan. He came to visit me last week. I was surprised. Declan had never mentioned it. I felt a brief flash of annoyance, then understanding. My son was a man now. He was closing his own circles, healing his own wound. I need to talk to you, she continued, her voice rushed. I saw a story on television about the ranch, about how well you're all doing. I'd just like to talk. I thought for a moment. I could easily refuse. I owed her nothing, but there was a fragility in her voice, a brokenness that was a world away from the confident woman I had once known. Okay, I said, the coffee shop in town. Tomorrow at 3. She arrived 10 minutes late. I was already at a small table in the corner when she walked in. I almost didn't recognize her. The past 5 years had been cruel. There were deep lines etched around her eyes, her hair was dull, and she was far too thin. But what struck me the most was the dress she was wearing. It was a new dress, but it was an identical copy of the one she had worn that day at the motel. A simple, elegant sheath, the color of a perfect summer rose. I thought this would give me courage, she said, her voice barely a whisper as she sat down across from me, her hand nervously touching the fabric. But now I just feel ridiculous. I ordered coffee for us both and waited. I want you to know that I know I was wrong, she began, her eyes fixed on the tabletop. I know I destroyed our family. I know I hurt you and the boys in a way that's unforgivable. I listened in silence as she recounted the years since I'd left. Preston Holloway had dumped her the same night I'd called his wife. He told her she was just an adventure, that he would never leave his family for her. The story I had heard in whispers was now laid bare. The drinking, losing her job, the string of men, each one worse than the last. She told me about Gage, about him hitting Declan. That's when I knew I'd hit the bottom, she said, her voice breaking. She continued, telling me how after the boys left, she had spiraled even deeper, ending up in a hospital after a suicide attempt. She'd spent 6 months in a rehabilitation clinic. That's where I finally understood, she said, wiping a tear with a napkin. I understood that I cheated on you because I felt invisible in our marriage. But that was my own emptiness, and it never justified what I did. She looked up at me for the first time. I've been sober for 2 years and 4 months. I got a job at the Sweetland Candy Factory 3 years ago. I live in a small apartment, and I go to AA meetings 3 times a week. Why did you want to see me, Cassandra? I asked gently. Because I need to apologize. For everything. I know you've rebuilt your life. I know Willow is a wonderful mother to Declan and Silas. I've seen the pictures. You're all happy. I needed you to know that I am aware of the damage I caused, and that I am truly sorry. I looked at the woman in front of me. She was broken, yes, but she also seemed more real, more genuine than the woman I had been married to for 17 years. Cassandra, I said finally, and the words felt true and light as I spoke them. I forgave you a long time ago. Carrying that anger would have only poisoned me and my new family. And she started to cry again, but this time it was a quiet, cleansing cry. But there's something I need you to understand, I continued. You say you destroyed our family, and that's partially true. You destroyed what we had. But in doing so, you freed me to find something even better. If you had never betrayed me, I would have never truly known Willow. I would have never discovered what it means to be truly loved and valued for who I am. She raised her eyes, surprised. Declan and Silas have a wonderful mother now, I said. They have a stable, happy home. You caused a great deal of pain, Cassandra, but from that pain, something beautiful was born. Sometimes the bad things that happen in our lives are the push we need to find where we truly belong. I stood up and left enough money on the table to cover the bill. I looked at her one last time, sitting there in her dress of ghosts and regrets. "That red dress really looks good on you today," I said. But this time, there was no ice in my voice. It was said with the genuine, peaceful smile of a man who had found his way home. As I walked out into the afternoon sun, I knew she understood. She understood that some doors, when they close, open windows to even more beautiful places. And that red dress was never about the fabric or the color. It was about the choices we make, and how we live with the consequences. I had transformed betrayal into freedom, pain into growth, and an ending into a new beginning more promising than I could have ever imagined.